Hello, friends at JPPI. I'm Alan Cooperman. I'm the Director of Religion Research at the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C. I'm very glad to be with you. Thank you to Shmuel Rossner and others who invited me to give you a quick presentation on the results of our 2020 survey of American Jews. I'm going to walk through at Shmuel's request, particularly some of the findings about attitudes toward Israel. As I do this, I'm going to be paying particular attention to three patterns: differences by age cohorts, differences between Jewish denominations such as Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform Jews, and differences by political party. These differences are clearly interrelated. There's a higher share of Orthodox Jews among younger Americans, and a higher share of Orthodox Jews are Republican than among Jews in general. And these patterns probably will not surprise you because we also saw them in the 2013 study. I'm not in position to contend that these patterns are sharper or larger than they were in 2013. Those kinds of judgments are clouded by methodological differences, nor am I really in a position to assert what underlying causes might be behind these patterns. Mostly I'm going to be discussing the data at a descriptive level. We are continuing to do multivariate analysis and work with our survey advisors and other scholars in Israel and in the United States to try to better understand these findings. So with that, let me proceed. You probably know the Pew Research Center. We're in Washington, D.C. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-advocacy research center. The funding for this study came from our parent organization, the Pew Charitable Trusts, and from the Neubauer Family Foundation. These are the same two sources of funding as in our 2013 study. Methodologically, the 2020 study is quite different from the 2013 study. In 2013, we did the study by telephone through random digit dialing. Unfortunately, telephone response rates have continued to plummet. They are less than a third of what they were in 2013 today in the United States. And so we decided this time to do the survey by address-based sampling. That is, we took the U.S. Postal Service's master list of all the residential addresses in the United States. We stratified them geographically, and we sent letters, series of letters, to randomly selected addresses in particular geographic areas, inviting the people who received the letters to take a brief screening survey in one of two ways: either to go online to take it at a secure website, or to fill it out on paper and mail it back to us in an addressed envelope. So let me be clear. People did not have to have online access to complete this survey. The survey began with this national sample. We completed more than 68,000 screening interviews across the country. The response rate is about 17% in total, very similar to what it was in 2013, when it was 16%. And we identified about 4,700 people through the screening that we classify as Jewish in one of two ways: either as Jews by religion, that is, in answer to a question about their religion, they say they're Jewish, or as Jews of no religion, that is, people who say that they are atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular when it comes to their religion, but they do consider themselves Jewish in other ways, such as culturally, ethnically, or by their family background. And they do have a Jewish parent, or in some cases, two Jewish parents. The survey was designed and largely completed before the coronavirus pandemic, and so these data should be viewed as the status quo pre-pandemic in the United States. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is very different. Both the sampling method in particular is very different from 2013. And in a way to try to understand those differences and to evaluate them, we conducted a large, separate, but accompanying methodological study, what we call a mode study, in which we randomly assigned a separate sample of respondents, none of the main respondents, to one of two treatments, either to be interviewed by telephone or to be interviewed online or by paper. And we can look at the differences between those two groups of randomly assorted respondents. And we've done that in order to try to understand the impact of the methodological change. And unfortunately, on many questions, the impact is substantial enough that we cannot with confidence compare the results between 2013 and 2020 and assume that they represent real change over time. They are more likely artifacts of the different methodological approaches. There are some, broadly speaking, signs of stability in the survey. The US population of Jews is quite stable as a share of the total US adult population at a little more than 2%. The branch identification of Jews or denominational attachments of Jews are very similar to what they were in 2013. Reform is still the largest group, followed by conservative and Orthodox, and then other branches like Reconstructionist and Humanistic Judaism. And there is a substantial share of Jews, close to a third now of American Jews, who don't identify with any particular Jewish denomination. We'll talk about that a little more. And intermarriage rates on the whole, overall, are rather stable. It's about 42% of all current intact Jewish respondent marriages, all Jewish respondents in the survey who are in current intact marriages. At present, about 42% say that their spouse is not Jewish. Now that's at present, not at the time of the marriage. All those are pretty similar to what they were in 2013, but below the surface, we do see evidence within the survey of some kinds of change. One of the important ones is a rising share of younger Jews who identify as Orthodox. And in fact, in that 17% of Jewish adults under the age of 30 who are Orthodox, the majority of them identify as Haredi in some way, either as Hasidic or as Litvish or one of the other Haredi subgroups in the US population. At the same time, the share of younger Jews who identify as conservative or reform is declining. It's lower than it is among older age cohorts quite considerably. And the share who don't identify with any particular branch of American Judaism is rising by age cohort. Another way of thinking about the same data is to look at the binary distinction between Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. We see by age cohort among younger cohorts a declining share of people who identify with the Jewish religion and rising shares who identify as culturally or ethnically Jewish, but not with the Jewish religion. And again, to be clear, the Jews of no religion do not identify with any other religion. These are not Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, or any other religious group. They're people who identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, and do consider themselves Jewish aside from religion. We'll see some of the characteristics of these groups, particularly in their attitudes toward Israel, as we proceed. This is what we call a dot plot. It compresses a lot of information into a single page, and each dot and each color represents an age cohort. If the dots are close together, they indicate that there are few differences by age. If the dots are far apart, they indicate that there are substantial differences by age. And what I want you to see is that on a variety of questions about Israel, the age differences are substantial. The dots are far apart and generally following a simple pattern, which is that the younger age cohorts are lower in their levels of attachment or connection to Israel and lower in their levels of political approval for Israel's leadership at the time of the survey, as well as less opposed to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and less likely to say that God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Older age cohorts are more attached to Israel in general, more likely to say that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them, more likely to rate Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership as good or excellent, more likely to oppose the BDS movement, and more likely to say that God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Drilling in a little bit on this, let's look in particular at a question about whether American Jews have a lot in common with Jews in Israel, some, not much, or nothing at all. The darkest shade on these bars represents the share who say they have a lot in common with Jews in Israel. You'll see overall that in the very top bar that about 1 in 5 American Jews say they have a lot in common with Jews in Israel, and a majority of American Jews, close to 6 in 10, say they have either a lot or some in common. And you'll see that Jews by religion are much more likely than Jews of no religion to say they have a lot in common, and that Orthodox Jews are more likely than conservative, Reform, or Jews who don't identify with any particular branch of American Judaism to say they have a lot in common with Jews in Israel. This pattern is repeated across many of these questions with different figures, but the same general pattern. For example, when we ask about travel to Israel, we'll see that overall, about a quarter of American Jews have been to Israel more than once, and it's close to half of American Jews who've been to Israel at least once. Jews by religion, again, more likely to have done so. Jews of no religion, least likely to have done so. Orthodox Jews, most likely to have done so. Same pattern comes to emotional attachment to Israel. The darkest part of these bars represents those who say they are very attached, very emotionally attached to the Jewish state. Among Jews by religion, about a third say that. Among Jews of no religion, just 6% say that. Again, same pattern denominationally, Orthodox Jews showing very high levels, relatively speaking, of emotional attachment to Israel. Conservative and Reform Jews, also majorities of those groups, solid majorities, saying they feel either very or somewhat attached to Israel. Among Jews who don't identify with any particular branch of Israel, it's a minority who feel either very or somewhat attached to Israel. By political party, Republicans more likely to say they're very attached to Israel than Democrats. Again, there are more Orthodox among the Republicans, more Republicans among the Orthodox. So these are very interrelated patterns. And you'll also see that Jews who've been to Israel are more likely to say they're emotionally attached to Israel. This is, however, a bit of a chicken and egg question. It could be that it's a result of having been to Israel, but it could also be that people who are more emotionally attached to Israel are more likely to have made the trip. So this doesn't prove causality, though it is consistent with a hypothesis that programs like Birthright, etc., may be having an impact on Jews who go to Israel. And there's additional research to be done in this area, which we are working on, and some of our colleagues are also working on. Overall, about nearly half, 45% of American Jews say that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. And altogether, 8 in 10 American Jews say it's at least important or essential. These rates are also higher among Jews by religion than of Jews of no religion, though it's notable that even among Jews of no religion, a majority say that caring about Israel is either essential to what it means to them to be Jewish or important. Interestingly, conservative Jews are as likely as Orthodox Jews, or maybe slightly more likely on this measure, to say that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. We asked a question this time we didn't ask in 2013 about whether people follow news about Israel. Same general pattern. A little more than half of American Jews say they follow news about Israel very closely or somewhat closely. Jews by religion much more inclined to say that they very closely follow news about Israel than Jews of no religion, a minority of whom either somewhat or very closely follow news about Israel. And again, the same pattern among the Jewish denominations, with Orthodox highest and those who don't identify with any branch of Judaism lowest. We were asked the same question that we did in 2013 about U.S. policy toward Israel. Is U.S. policy too supportive of Israel, not supportive enough of Israel, or is the level of U.S. policy about right? And because of the methodological differences explained in the mode study, which you can read in an appendix to our report on our website at pewresearch.org, we cannot say with confidence that these numbers are different from what they were in 2013, but we can see many of the same patterns that we saw in 2013, which are, again, that Jews by religion are less likely to say that the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. The darkest bar here represents those who say the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. We see those who don't identify with any branch of American Judaism are the most likely to say that the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. And Democratic Jews are more likely than Jews who are Republican or lean Republican to say the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. When it comes to Netanyahu and ratings of his leadership as Prime Minister of Israel, Orthodox Jews give Prime Minister Netanyahu, or gave Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time of the survey, very high ratings overall. Solid majority said he had done either an excellent job or a good job as Prime Minister. That was not the case among Democratic-leaning Jews or among Jews in some of the other branches, particularly Reform Jews and Jews who don't identify with any particular branch of American Judaism, most of whom gave Netanyahu only fair or even poor ratings as Prime Minister. And note, among Jewish Democrats, and that's a solid majority of American Jews. So Democrats, about 70% of American Jews are Democratic or lean Democratic, and most of them gave Prime Minister Netanyahu only fair or poor ratings as Prime Minister. At the same time, American Jews remain optimistic that a way can be found for Israel and an independent Palestinian state to coexist in peace. This is kind of our two-state solution question. We asked the same question in 2013. Again, because of methodological differences, I'm not prepared to compare the results directly with 2013. I don't think that that would be responsible. But the same patterns that we saw do hold. Jews by religion are a little less optimistic about a two-state solution than Jews of no religion. Democratic-leaning Jews are more optimistic than Republican-leaning Jews, and Jews in the less traditional or more liberal branches of American Judaism, Reform and no particular branch, are more optimistic than Orthodox Jews. We also asked the same question as in 2013 about whether the Israeli government is making a sincere effort toward a peace settlement with the Palestinians, and whether the Palestinian leadership is making a sincere effort toward a peace settlement with Israel. And we find that minorities of American Jews feel that either the Israeli government is sincere or the Palestinians are sincere. It's only a third of American Jews who feel the Israeli government is making a sincere effort toward a peace settlement, at least at the time of the survey, and even fewer, about 1 in 8 American Jews feel that the Palestinian leadership is making a sincere effort. You do see one very notable group in which a majority feel the Israeli government is sincere, and that's Republican-leaning Jews and Orthodox Jews as well. We asked for the first time a question about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. We did not attempt to explain what that movement is. We did base the question on those who said they at least have heard something or a lot about BDS. So we first asked whether respondents have heard about BDS, And if they had heard about BDS, then we asked them whether they support it or oppose it. Again, we didn't explain what BDS is other than to use the name of the movement. So we find that a lot of American Jews have not heard, they have not heard about BDS, and therefore they weren't asked whether they oppose or support it. These numbers are based on the total Jewish population. So 10% of American Jews overall say they support the BDS movement, 43% oppose it, including a third who say they strongly oppose it. Those numbers rise sharply, the opposition numbers among the Orthodox and conservative populations. So among Orthodox Jews, 70% oppose it and 2/3 strongly oppose BDS. Again, even among the Orthodox, there are quite a few who say they have not heard about BDS. And among Republicans, Jews who lean Republican or identify as Republicans, more than half say they oppose the BDS movement, including 54% who say they strongly oppose it. The most support for BDS is found among Jews of no religion and Jews who don't identify with any particular branch of Judaism. Those two groups are highly overlapping. And we asked some questions about Trump's handling of U.S. policy toward Israel. The survey took place during the final approximately 14 months of Trump's term. In the run-up to the election, it was not yet clear who would win the U.S. election at the time the survey took place. And at that time, overall, a majority of American Jews rated Trump's handling of U.S. policy toward Israel as only fair or poor. Only about 4 in 10 gave Trump's handling of U.S. policy toward Israel either good or excellent ratings. But that was not the case among the Orthodox. Among the Orthodox, a solid majority gave Trump good or excellent ratings. Close to 7 in 10 gave him excellent ratings. And when we look at this by partisanship, it really pops. The differences are huge. Overwhelmingly, Republicans and those who lean Republican in the Jewish population gave Trump excellent ratings, whereas among Democrats and those who lean Democratic, the majority gave Trump only fair or poor ratings for his handling of policy toward Israel. We also asked a couple of interesting questions, parallel questions, about whether Americans viewed Donald Trump as friendly toward Israel, or neutral, or unfriendly toward Israel, and similarly whether Americans viewed Trump as friendly, neutral, or unfriendly toward American Jews. And what's interesting here, I think, is that on the whole, American Jews did see Trump as friendly toward Israel. Even among Democrats, the majority saw him as friendly or neutral toward Israel, and only a minority saw him as unfriendly. But on the question of attitudes towards Jews in the United States, we see much more skepticism about Trump's attitudes towards Jews. And indeed, among Jewish Democrats, only a minority thought that Trump was actually truly friendly toward American Jews, notwithstanding the widely known fact that he had Jews in his own immediate family. Some of this may stem from incidents such as Charlottesville. Some of it may be pure partisanship. We, of course, don't know exactly why, but it is a really interesting pattern, I think, that bespeaks a lot of skepticism toward Trump among American Jews. And exit polls in the election did indicate that Jews on the whole voted Democratic, voted for Joe Biden in the election. We're not responsible for the exit polls. That's not Pew data. Large majorities of Orthodox did feel that Trump was friendly both to Israel and to Jews in the United States. And that's the end of the brief descriptive overview of our findings, particularly on questions toward Israel. There's a great deal more information in the survey, many other questions about Jewish practices, religious and cultural practices in the United States, and attitudes on many other issues and questions. You can find it in the report on our webpage at pewresearch.org. And you also have my email address if you wish to contact me, a.cooperman@pewresearch.org. Thanks again to my friends and colleagues at JPPI, and thank you for all the great work that you've done on Jewish demography and sociology in Israel, in the United States, and around the world. Thank you for your interest in our work.